How we doing, Vetters? Patrick here with Vetted. This is a crazy video. You see, Dr. Garry Nolan and Diana Pasulka got together for an interview together for the very first time ever, as far as I know. I've never seen an interview with them together. So the fact they got together for an interview is kind of a big deal. Just, one by themselves is great, but together, this was a phenomenal conversation, and we learned a lot about this famous trip that Dr. Garry Nolan and Diana Pasulka took out to the New Mexico desert to a UFO crash site, collected materials, had it tested, yada, yada. This is a huge story that we've all followed, and they revealed a lot of new information about that story that I've never heard before, and I followed it very closely. Why? Because it involves someone that Diana and Garry referred to as Tyler D, but as we all know in the UFO community, that is Tim Taylor, the NASA, I don't know, NASA head, NASA scientist, I don't think he's a scientist, I don't know, NASA guy who famously worked with Chris Bledsoe and many other people, right? And this story that Tim Taylor, took Diana and Garry Nolan out to the desert, blindfolded, to this alleged UFO crash site to collect materials. That's the subset here, right? So everything we're going to get into, all the clips that I have today are covering that. New information about that, the materials that Garry recovered, the analysis, all of the stuff, other stuff that I'd never heard about the situation because Gary's never talked about it. Diana's talked about it quite a bit, but Garry has rarely commented on it. So this is a phenomenal conversation. Now, this all took place on Chris Lehto's podcast, the Lehto Files. I've had Chris Lehto on Vetted before. He's a great guy, and this was a phenomenal interview that he put together, and he gets right to it. He's just asked him, hey, what happened in the desert? What's going on with that? So it was great. And at the very, very end, stay with me because Garry Nolan also dropped a few nuggets about Skywatcher and what they're been doing and what they have upcoming. So stay to the very end for that. Let's jump into this because we got a lot of clips to break down. And Vetters, please don't forget to hit that like button. That really helps out the videos. And of course, if you're not already subscribed, hit that subscribe button. I'm trying to get to 100,000 subscribers before the end of the year. Here's the first one. Again, this is talking about Tim Taylor, a.k.a. Tyler D, taking Diana and Garry Nolan out to a UFO crash site, right? This is all detailed in American Cosmic, Diana Pasulka's book. So let's get this started.
But what happened and what did you guys find at the New Mexico site?
Yeah, so I recorded this in American Cosmic, and we, went to this site. We were both blindfolded, and Tyler D, who I keep as pseudonymous, went there with us. Well, he took us there. And so we did find what looked like, to me, it looked like kind of like a frog skin type material. And we took that back, and Garry analyzed it. I know that he thought it was anomalous at first, but I actually don't know what his finding is today, but that's what, from my perspective, we found.
Well, perfect. Well, luckily we have him right here. What did you find, Garry?
Right. Well, so there were several different pieces. And, it's interesting. The audience needs to understand that scientists are accustomed, when they talk about their data, to people always knowing that this is preliminary until I send it out. And just like, for instance, with the Atacama, when I first looked at the data with the Atacama mummy, I didn't quite understand what the sequences meant because there was a lot of junk. And so when I began reporting it to my colleague, he who shall go unnamed, it was like, well, like 90% of it doesn't seem to fit anything.
And also, if you're interested in more stuff about Tim Taylor, I did a huge deep dive about 7 months ago. One of the best videos I've ever put together. I'll put a link down below so you can go check it out. I highly recommend it. A lot of people watch it. A lot of people said it's a great video. It's a huge deep dive, again, on Tim Taylor, a.k.a. Tyler D. All right, so the pieces that they found, there's just a whole story to this, and we're going to get into this because Gary's going to explain the whole thing that he just hasn't before spoken about before. right? So they get these pieces, and stuff comes out about the pieces that, maybe they're alien, right? And some stuff that he had initially told Diana, and Diana went and talked about it, and there's been some updates since. So basically, let's talk a little bit more about these UFO pieces.
So with the metals and the materials that I recall us bringing back, one were the so-called what was it, the alien honeycomb, as it was called at the time. And I mean, it definitely looked strange. Uh, uh, there was another which was kind of this silvery black covered metal that was slightly friable. And then there were a few pieces, clear pieces of metal that looked like aluminum with kind of scratchings and etchings on them, not etchings as if somebody was writing hieroglyphics, just kind of a pattern with a brown substance on them. And there might have been one or two more that we found. And in fact, Diana was like a divining rod out there. Every time she turned around, she was finding something. I was mostly spent my time up on a ridge from where the object was supposed to have come over and supposedly hit before it landed on the other side of the little ravine. It wasn't so much a ravine as a long flat area.
Okay, so Gary also is going to get into like how this alleged UFO crashed, because I'd never really heard all the details of what craft they were actually looking at, right? So there's more details about that, but he's basically just going to go through the process here of taking the materials that they got from the crash site through airport security, and guess what? He got stopped.
The event of me putting my samples through the metal detector at the airport and the metal detector shutting down absolutely happened. And as Diana knows, I went white. Because I had samples in there, and I was sure that they were going to open the thing up, find this stuff, and drag me off to the penitentiary somewhere. So when I got back and did some of the measurements, there looked to be a lot of anomalous isotopes or metals that I reported to Diana for sure. And when I looked more closely, though, and again, so this is the thing: the scientists like to be right, but good scientists know that very often they're wrong, and when they don't understand something, the best thing to do is actually go find the real expert on metals, for instance, or how to use a certain instrument, etc. And as many have remarked on the internet, on Twitter, well, Gary's an immunologist, he's not a metallurgist, so what right does he have to do anything in this area? Well, I have the right to ask the question first and then to go find the expert to make sure that what I'm doing is right. And that's what I do.
Okay, so the basic situation is Gary gets these materials, and then people are wondering, why is he the one studying it, right? So he goes and gets an expert and finds out. But again, on his initial kind of looking at it, he kind of told Diana some things here, right? Like, oh, this may be, not of this world, right? And then when he digs a little bit further, he finds out this.
And so they said there's a thing called diatomics. And diatomics in mass spectrometry are the atoms might have been individually separated in the sample, but in the process of activating the sample, turning it into ions, and then it goes into a cloud, those individual atoms might come together during the measurement, stick, and then when their mass is measured, rather than being individual atom masses, they are the combined atom mass. So they look bigger than what they are. So if silicon were together with silicon, it could be something like 54, which would make it look like chromium, I think, etc. And the only way to discern that is there's a few settings on the machine that you can set that lowers the chance for a diatomic, because it would have a double charge to get there, or you better separate the objects or lower the concentration. So at first, it looked like the samples were not of this earth because they had so many mixtures in there that just didn't seem to be right. Okay, but then when you start asking the expert, they say, "Here's the explanation for why that looks this way." So I didn't figure that out probably until about 3 years after the article was published. But I wasn't going to ever take the bait that was being put out there in the press as to try to start some kind of consternation between Diana and I. Diana reported what I told her, and what she reported was what I thought at the time. And so any mistake was mine.
And so, yeah, that had kind of happened where they were trying to divide Diana and Garry, and they were kind of saying different things. And I had even covered it in a video myself. So maybe Gary's even talking about some stuff I was saying. I wasn't trying to start beef with them by no means. But there were some statements that didn't coincide together. Let's just put it that way. But now Gary's here clearing it up with Diana, and this is great. This is all we wanted. Just clear it up. What's up with those materials? So here's Diana explaining a little bit more from her side of things.
Yes, so you have to understand that this is the time period was a while ago. I was writing this book, and I still didn't believe in the phenomena at all. I was shocked that Garry and Tyler believed it because they're so credible and amazingly intelligent. It was beginning to dawn on me that it was real. So as I was out there doing this field work, I recognized that this was, it's not just that you had people like Garry Halputoff and, physicists and then other people that were well placed in programs like Tyler. It's not just that they were doing this work. It's also the fact that I'd spent my entire life looking historically at things that were considered aerial phenomena back in the day, and that it fit the pattern. And so there was a pattern match. So all of this, and that Tyler predicted that Garry would get stopped in the airport and that this would happen. And that everything happened exactly as he said. I was very concerned about Garry. Tyler was completely fine. He knew exactly what was going to happen. He knew Garry was going to be let off, and and he described the process. So he was sitting there having a cup of water, and I was, had white knuckles. I also thought something really terrible would happen to Garry, and I thought, wow, I'm glad I gave this stuff to Garry.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
I'm just joking. But I do remember at the time, I thought, I do not want this stuff. I don't know what it is, but I don't want it because first, Garry can figure it out. But secondly, I just had this feeling that, if it was really what Tyler thought it was, then this would not, I just didn't want to have it. So there was a bunch of things going on in my head, to tell you the truth, Chris. So yeah, it was way out of my comfort zone. But now looking back, I'm really happy that we did that because, there were some colleagues of ours who I asked, and, first, thinking that this person would want to do this because I didn't want to go by myself. I wanted to take an academic with me. And, the colleague was like, Diana, I don't want to do that. They're so far out of my comfort zone. So I asked Garry, and Garry was like, I'll do it tomorrow.
And so that's hilarious, right? That Diana asked other people, and Gary's like, I'll go, right? Which is great because this turned out to be a phenomenal experience that they were able to share. And I think actually when all the dust settles, it's still something, these are great data points, right? Why is Tim Taylor taking them out there? And as we move along here, there was just so many details that just still don't add up about this. But look, Garry isn't done talking about those materials. He wants to make sure that we all understand exactly what came of those UFO materials that he collected, again, from this alleged UFO crash site.
But I want to add, something about the materials analysis. So just because it didn't have a mixture of practically every element on the table and things in between, doesn't mean that I figured out what it is. The alien honeycomb Larry Lemke and I would say more Larry than me, Larry looked into the literature and found examples from that era of aerofoil that exactly matched the honeycomb with even the knot we found is a knot from the early 1900s that actually is a fisherman's web, but they had adapted that exact structure to lay over the honeycomb structure that they then poured the resin on, and that helped keep everything in place. But there were still, I still have the samples. Just because I can say that they're made of the elements that are supposed to be found in this universe doesn't mean that they didn't come from somewhere else. What was 100% clear was that the debris field was in the middle of nowhere, filled with old pots and cans, bottles, even like, I think we found like an old tomato can. Remember that big old tomato can? You can still see the writing on the thing crushed. And the tomato can was from like the 1930s. So they used it as a dumping field, but also mixed in aerospace material in the middle of nowhere, literally in the middle of nowhere. And so, you're open. It's just like, why would you do this? So why was I up on that ridge? Something that I haven't talked about publicly yet, ever, but I will here for the first time. So I think it's interesting. Because it's unlikely that I'll have a chance to go back to the site. So, supposedly this thing came down and hit the ridge, broke, spilled stuff across the debris field, and then stopped on the other side. We've already spoken about the debris field being purposefully, apparently, contaminated. Or the object came down in just the wrong place in a debris field that somebody else had pre-created. So across the ridge, there were all of these cypress trees, very old cypress trees, probably several hundred years old. Because if the reason why we make wooden fences out of cypress is because they're filled with resin, and fungi and bacteria don't decay them. And that's the reason why they're great, and why there's fewer cypress trees on the planet than there should be, because humans are busy chopping them all down for the utility. So there's all these old trees along the ridge, and then exactly where there should have been, based on where the object supposedly crashed and the trajectory, there's a giant cypress tree that was still partly alive, but which had been broken over, crushed. I mean, like, obviously some heavy object had hit this thing and knocked it over. And guess which direction it was knocked over? In the direction of the trajectory. So somebody else can go out there, or the CIA can go out there tomorrow and dig the whole thing up and make it look like it wasn't there in the first place, because it was there when I saw it. There was evidence of a crash, right, in the piece of the cypress tree, which clearly had some stuff starting to grow over it, but it didn't look like it happened last year. It could have easily happened long ago, and there was still these pokes of the cypress tree trying to revive itself from that time long ago. So, to me, it all that more than anything else said there was a crash. And then the debris field suggests that somebody was trying to hide something. And that's about it.
All right, so this next part is where these details start to not add up, because Diana is going to basically say that Tyler D, aka Tim Taylor, has been excavating this site for over 40 years, and he knows the people that owned it. But there's been stories floating around, and I've even been told on this podcast by people that Tim Taylor found out about that site in the early 2010s at an experiencer party in Canada, and it was taken there and shown it, and then proceeded to then tell people like Diana and Garry, hey, I've been going to this crash site for decades, when that is allegedly not true at all. So I don't know what the real story is there, but allegedly Tim Taylor has not been excavating this place for 40 years. But all of this is new information, right, that Garry's about to get into, because not allegedly, Garry's admitting it right here, him and Tim Taylor tried to buy the land where this crash site was.
And so you don't think it could have been like a transport aircraft or something carrying tomato cans across the country.
Well, yeah. I mean, all we have are the supposed verbal testimonies of the anthropologist, the Harvard anthropologist, who was somewhere off in the distance looking at, I guess, Indian burial grounds or something, or a cave, and then the farmer and his son who showed up the day after, and then the son supposedly came back later uh, to see the soldiers cleaning up the area and then burying some of the pieces that they didn't want to carry back.
Yeah,
That's right. Isn't that part of history?
that's right. Those sources are actual sources, and most people aren't accustomed to looking at them, but those are corroborating sources from people who don't know each other of this. And what's also interesting is that Tyler had been researching and excavating that site for 40 years.
Wow. 40
And
years.
he knew the owners, and so I have a suspicion that if the place had been cleaned up, there's still a place where perhaps people didn't think to clean up. And I'm not going to mention that publicly because maybe someday I will go back. That Tyler and I talked about trying to buy the site from the original owners. And to that end, that day we had a late afternoon lunch with the owner, who was an old woman. Oh gosh, how old was that? How old? She was like
Yeah.
89.
She came in with her dog. It was a really, just a really local place, with a gas station restaurant that had been there for probably since the 40s, maybe even longer. I don't know. But yeah, so Gary, I was under the impression that it was not, they were homesteading it. Am I wrong? Or
Yeah. They it's Bureau of Land Management. They had a lease on it. There was an opportunity perhaps to acquire it because it was more land than they needed, and maybe they would sell it cheap. But I don't think we ever followed through on the acquisition.
So look, a bunch of new information about this particular event that I had never heard from. I covered this before, and so this was all revelations to me. And there's still some confusing parts about it, especially from Tim Taylor, for sure. Right, but at least some new data points here about this particular event, and it is kind of strange they just all of a sudden come out with this out of nowhere. I don't even know, like, why. They're just so unusual, but I'll take it. Right, again, Dr. Garry Nolan, Diana Pasulka together in an interview talking about this particular event just doesn't happen, y'all. So this is super unique, and I hope you enjoyed those clips. Now, if you remember at the beginning, I talked about Garry Nolan giving us some updates about Skywatcher. Well, here we go.
What have you learned about the phenomenon in the last 2 years, Gary?
First, that it's more measurable than I thought it would be. And that would be, say, through the efforts that I've been involved with at Skywatcher. And some of the materials, purely publicly available materials, not secret stuff that people think I have access to, which I don't. So it's more measurable because we can put together sensor systems that can see things. But it's harder in that figuring out what the data actually means and coming to the kinds of conclusions that people think scientists should be able to come to is more difficult. So I would say they're both good from the scientific standpoint. We have access to more materials. We know that we have analyses, approaches that can approximate them. We're beginning to get reproducibility. But as is the case always in science, the more data you get, often the harder it is to come to conclusions to create a standardized picture.
And what's also interesting is when Garry Nolan is asked, what's the best evidence, right, of the phenomena that you've come across, he also brings up Skywatcher. But it's also interesting that he can't just answer that outright. But I also get it, put on the spot, what's the best evidence? Oh my God, but it is interesting that you just wouldn't have that like ready to go. Well, this is the best evidence right here, You just always know that. It's just there. Why wouldn't you know that? I don't know. I'd probably answer the same way. But either way, take a look.
What is the best evidence for NHI that you've come across?
Well, the certainty claim has been misunderstood, but it didn't stop it from going worldwide. Stanford scientists is 100% sure of this X, Y, or Z, which I hadn't actually said that. If you look back at what I said, it was basically, what do you think the chance that it is here? I said, if I were to make a bet, it would be 100%.
Do you believe that extraterrestrial intelligence has visited planet Earth?
I think you can go a step further. It hasn't just visited, it's been here a long time, and it's still here. And it has basically, people talk about the wow signal, looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. The wow signal is that people see it on an almost regular basis. That's the communication that's already here.
And that statement seems so incredible that it's tough to believe, right? Like, people hear that, and maybe a lot of people here hear that, and they don't believe it. And so I'm curious, if you had to assign a probability to that statement, that you believe extraterrestrial intelligence has visited this planet, what probability would you assign?
100%. At the end of the day, when you're placing a bet on the table on roulette, you're going to place it somewhere, and you're 100% certain it's going to be that when you do it, or you go home having lost all your money. There's a beautiful hummingbird right outside the window looking at me. So the best evidence, I would say there's a lot of the best evidence, but stuff that I've been involved with Skywatcher, where we make this supposed call, and then things show up within a time frame posted, and then I've got pictures of things like right next to the helicopter that showed up, or just coincidence of this on one of our separate events when objects were seen, and we have pictures of the stuff flying by rapidly. Because it's moving so gosh darn fast that all you see is it across perhaps 2 or 3 frames of a rapid camera moving, and it's not a bug, so I don't care what anybody says. So it's those kinds of things that convince me further that, at least not being the government, we can collect that data.
All right. And also, Garry Nolan put out this tweet about Skywatcher because, you see, one of Skywatcher's, members, James Fowler, who was heavily, profiled just in the last few months as being the guy behind sort of their technology, their dog whistle technology of calling them out and bringing, UFOs in with their psionic assets and capturing all the video and photo data and all that stuff. He has left Skywatcher now. And Garry Nolan made a post kind of, congratulating him on his new post. But this is where Garry also mentioned some new stuff about Skywatcher. So let's take a look at the post. I'd like to wish James Fowler much success in his new GovCon endeavor and personally thank him for his efforts to support Skywatcher over these past 9 months. The team at Skywatcher is excited about moving into the next phase of our discovery framework and beginning the analytic process of scientifically evaluating the data collected from our field operations over the past 6 months. We have a vast amount of data to parse through and then analyze. I've worked with big data for my last 2 decades in the biosciences space. We could collect the data in a few days, then spend the next 6 months analyzing. The scientific process will not be rushed, so please be patient as we are doing this for the good of the community and want to do it the right way. Once we have a clear understanding of the data's significance, it will be compiled into a report and, if possible, developed into a paper for peer review. That's the stage at which I would personally like to see the paper put on one of the RCIV servers. I'm not sure what that says, but regardless, they're trying to get their data peer reviewed. That's all we ever wanted. So sounds like they have some stuff that maybe we want to see. All right, I'll put a link down in the description if you want to check out the rest of that interview with Diana and Garry Nolan. I highly recommend it. It's a phenomenal interview. They talk about a lot of different stuff, so I'll put a link down below if you want to go check that out. All right, betters, we'll see you in the next one. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.